Okay, I think we'll start now with our workshop, then go into our regular meeting starting at 7:30. And for workshop, John Clark has offered to share with us some developments, thoughts, thinking the city's doing around the Main Street corridor, and I think specifically around public transport.
Yes.
And then, so we'll spend some time on that. I thought also it'd be a good idea to spend maybe 10 minutes at the end of the workshop just to talk about future workshops and ideas for content that that we might want to bring to the future meetings. So any thinking on that would be really helpful. So with that, John, please.
All right. So this comes out of work that I've been working on with the Main Street Advisory Committee on access. They've been working for 2 years now. It was only supposed to be a one-year thing, and then, you know, the pandemic hit and things slowed it down. And so in the meantime, they've put out probably about 7 or 8 memos to the city council on various subjects with recommendations. And some have been accomplished, not many. Council's been busy. We've made several presentations to the council, a couple, I think, and a couple here, in which I've shared different ideas that they've been working on. So what they decided on in January was to put together a compilation report of everything they've been working on and conclusions and recommendations at this point. They're not giving up yet, but they feel like they're getting close, and they want to put out something in a package that would sort of summarize all their efforts. And they're going to present to the city council at their workshop on April 25th. So if you want to see the whole report, it'll be posted online before that meeting, I'm sure. And Stowe, Boyd, and I will be giving a summary presentation on the recommendations. So I've actually worked on several segments with the planning board before. We talked about traffic calming and lighting and some of the other issues. Tonight, I thought we'd talk about public transit. And, you know, the Beacon has got the free loop system now, and county bus that comes down from Poughkeepsie. The free loop is great. It's free. In the last full year before the pandemic, they had 38,000 plus riders, which is pretty impressive. They haven't had as much since, obviously, but they're anticipating getting back to normal, I'm hoping. That's a great positive price incentive, but there's things about the free loop that aren't perfect. Number one, they're using a standard bus, oversized for Main Street. Main Street is narrow. You need to sort of manipulate in the stops and that sort of thing, and this bus is not suited well for Main Street. Carries a lot of people, but not very efficiently in terms of access and maneuverability. It also runs on a figure-8 loop pattern, so that if you get on at Main Street and want to go to the train station, you first have to go all the way up to the mountain and then back down past Tyranda and over to Walcott. And so it's not a very efficient way of getting from Main Street to the station or the waterfront. So part of this was to say, okay, for Main Street, what works for public transit? We really want to encourage public transit. And the idea that the committee came up with is we need to sort of reimagine the whole system and really think about transit anew. If you really want to get people out of cars and make this a more transit-friendly and pedestrian-friendly city, you have to make a transit city system that actually works rather than something that's a default for people who just don't have cars. You want to make the transit so comfortable and accessible that people are willing to give up their cars because they don't need them. And that's the goal. And so when we looked at transit systems, what's successful and not, we came up with 4 primary conditions that you have to meet. One, you have to integrate it with land uses. The comprehensive plans in the last 2 cycles focus development on the Linkage District and the Central Main Street District, both of which are transit, has transit accessibility. So the idea is to put more residents, more employment within that corridor where the bus runs, so that people live close enough that they can walk to the stop, or where their destinations are close to the stop. The second thing is to have direct routes to destinations, no more figure eights and diversions and transfers or any of those sorts of things. If you want to ride the bus regularly, it's got to go from where you are to where you want to be. And it can involve a lot of side trips, because otherwise it's just more easy to get into a car. Buses already have sort of a disadvantage to private automobiles. They have certain advantages. Parking, no need to park. But unless you can make that direct, convenient, and time efficient, people aren't going to use it, or at least not to the point where they want to give up their cars or leave their cars at home. Frequencies of no more than 10 to 15 minutes, and it really should be more 10 minutes, but I stretched it a little bit to 15, so that you don't have to have a schedule. You just go to the bus stop and it's going to come along pretty soon. And there's also, it's very convenient to have time to travel notification at the transit stop or on an app, so that you know exactly where the bus is and how long it's going to be to get there, so you know when to be ready, and that you know that it's coming and you don't have to wait. And the last thing is you have to make it comfortable and convenient throughout. The whole system has got to be designed for the customer, and most buses are not. They've got to have spacious shelters, so you don't feel like you're jammed in or exposed to the elements. You have to have level boarding, no steps, so you get on and off easily, so that transfer at the stop is efficient. Clean buses, soft seats, quiet electric motors, not diesel buses with diesel fumes. I used to ride the bus a lot when I was daily commuting to my work, and nothing is worse to get off the bus and it takes off and leaves you in a cloud of diesel fumes, which is all too typical. And most importantly, I think, if you really want to make it work for more than daily commuters, but for visitors too, is to make it stop at exciting public places as opposed to parking lots. So right now we have the free loop bus, and we have a county bus that comes down seasonally, and I don't know if this is going to continue this, but in past seasons there's been the Cold Spring Beacon trolley bus. But again, that's sort of an old-fashioned model of what a bus should look like. It's got high steps, it's got narrow aisles, it's got wooden seats. You know, it might look kind of cool, but does it function as a really efficient bus? And what we came up with is, if you're going to have a bus system for the 21st century that's reimagines the system, it should look more like the one on the corner down here, which is from Singapore. Self-driving, low ADA entrance, designed for efficient and comfortable ride. And it's better to have two small buses than one big one, because you can increase the frequency, and you don't have buses driving around half empty. You want the buses to be full and active and purposeful. So in the 2017 plan, this was a map from the 2017 plan, they proposed, and this is actually an idea that rolled over from the 2007 plan, something pretty unique, not only to concentrate development along that corridor, so new housing and new employment is within walking distance of Main Street and the linkage district down to the station, but also to organize the stops around civic places. So the idea was to put a stop and a public square, a garden, a pocket park, some sort of public place every 3 to 4 blocks along that route, and to have a frequent up and down Main Street route, more direct, more frequent, 10 to 15 minute layovers. And so they laid out a stop at the train station, at City Hall, at the county building, at the library, the post office, at Madam Breck Homestead, and down at Fountain Square. So that's a big undertaking to create 7 pocket parks along Main Street, but it is making the transit system a integrated system with land use and In addition, every one of those places has opportunity for infill buildings that will help frame the public space, make it more active, and hopefully help to construct and maintain that park, because it's going to be in the front yard of these new buildings that wrap around the park. So they create activities on the edge to make that public space really active and exciting, and they also help maintain that park as part of their operations. Most of those new infill buildings are on public land, because almost all of these are on public land. And so the city will be able to determine what sort of buildings go up, what's the affordability mix, what's the uses that are allowed or are targeted, and cut the deal so that they can help in the construction and maintenance of that park. And the park will have a transit stop with a shelter, hopefully a custom designed, attractive, unique sort of shelter on the front of every one of those parks. So the key transit recommendation out of the advisory report is to begin to implement this system by issuing requests for proposals for Veterans Place, which is the sort of centerpiece one right at the post office, and at the county center parking lot. So there'll be one on the east end, one on the western end of Main Street, both with large potential development opportunities and parking opportunities. So this is sort of the next step, is to try to sort of lay out a concept plan of how this would actually work and what it might look like. And so for various grant proposals and planning documents, we've come up with concept plans for almost all of these parks, at least the ones that are available on public land. So the Station Square, Veterans Place, this is the one around City Hall, and here's the one at the county center, for instance. It would wrap around the public park. People would circulate through the park to get to the entrance to the DMV. There's thought that this might be a civic building as well, maybe a relocation of city offices, city meeting space. And there's plenty of room for parking in the rear, because you could redesign that lot in the back to create 37 more spaces than there are in the lot today, even with no building on the front.
Sorry, that's proposing a building on the lot?
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is Elm Street and Main Street. So right now this is all parking, but it's really inefficiently laid out. So out of that parking lot, you can create a building, mixed-use, 3-story building, a public park, and more parking spaces than exist now.
Now I got to find a place for the farmer's market, John.
Well, the parking lot is still there for the farmer's market.
The rear parking lot, yeah.
Yeah. And there's also ideas for this parking lot here and this parking lot here. We've sort of looked at, there's a plan, which isn't on this drawing, for Fountain Square to create a green space and a fountain at Fountain Square, so that you would be able to have this system of a public transit system that runs around transit parks, essentially. So I've looked around to see if I could find anybody else who's doing anything similar and whether it's worked and whether you can learn lessons, and I haven't found anywhere in the country where this idea has really been played out.
Really?
There's a few places where you can find a transit shelter at a park. This is one of them. The best one I could find, this is up in Northampton, Mass. I went up and actually looked at this one. It's between 2 civic buildings. It's on Main Street. Has a bus shelter. This was a public park before, but they redesigned it to make it a public transit stop. And so they put the transit stop over here in the corner that points towards the plaza rather than towards the street. They have bike racks, a plaza out front for outdoor sort of eating and sitting, and then a big green space for performances in the center, and then a hill in the back where they have sort of tiered seating. It's a very nice park. This is a 1-acre park. It's a lot bigger than what we're talking about. We're talking about pretty compact pocket parks. But it's the only and best example I've found of a park that seems to be designed around a transit stop. And there's no system that I've found. If you go, you can find systems of parks like Savannah, Georgia, Portland, Oregon has a sort of systematic way of looking at parks and how to link them into a walking trail. Savannah does the same thing. But nobody has it linked up to a transit system that I've been able to find. Now, I haven't searched the world, but I did my best. And if anybody knows of a system that organizes parks around transit or transit around parks, I'd appreciate the heads up. So pocket parks are capable of doing incredible things, even in small spaces. You know, these are a few examples of Green Acre Park in downtown Manhattan. It's only 60 by 120, yet it really feels like a rich landscaped area. Waterfall Park in Seattle, even more dramatic waterfall. That's only 60 by 80. And this is a community garden up on the west side in Manhattan, 80 by 100, which really has a very nice green space and sittings areas and very actively used. And it has community gardens on the back side of it. So here's some dimensional for parks. And so somewhere in that 80 to 115 feet, you get sort of an intimate park. When you get bigger than that, you lose sight of people's facial recognition. You can't hear people. So a theater is no more than 115 feet or so, even with amplified voices. Can you have a outdoor theater? So somewhere in that range of 60 to 80 to 115, 120 feet is really sort of an ideal size for a intimate public space that has a lot of activity and sort of concentrates the activity so it feels alive, rather than a Central Park or something big that sort of scatters people all over the place. I think that's it. So I left 10 minutes for you.
No, that's fine. I'm just curious, who, maybe I should know this, but who runs the bus systems that operate in Beacon now? Is that the city?
No, Dutchess County.
That's the county.
Yeah, it's Dutchess County Transit System runs the bus system.
So,
Except for that seasonal bus up from Cold Spring, that's run by, I think, the Chamber of Commerce of Cold Spring or something, I don't know.
so I'm just curious around the recommendations of this committee in their conversation with the council in relationship to the bus system, what influence does the city have over the county on just that sort of thing?
The county has been very agreeable to new ideas on buses. They're very open-ended. I mean, they entered into the city a contract to do this free bus. That's unusual. They don't do that anywhere else in the system, as far as I know. And the city has to pay a certain annual fee for that to help support it, but they're using county employees and as bus drivers and the rest of it. So they provide the buses and work out the routes. And I've been in several meetings with them in which they've been very anxious to create the best sort of route system and the most effective transit system that can be had.
That's good. All the way up to driverless buses?
They haven't got that far yet, and they do have labor issues, so that
I'm
would
sure.
be a sticky one.
Yeah, well, it's good to know the city's, the county's cooperating and
Yes.
as a part of, potential change, that there's an avenue, potentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there are driverless buses already on the roads in the United States,
Yeah.
and certainly around the world. They're usually on fixed routes, which this would be susceptible to a fixed route
Yeah.
with designated stops. The technology is there, it's just, it has to be perfected.
Has to be
and
tested perfectly.
almost all of them have drivers or.
Backup drivers?
Yeah, they have drivers available
Yeah.
at this point, even the one in Singapore.
That's great. So then you said the committee is bringing this to the council to make some recommendations this month.
Yes,
And part of those recommendations are around those two parks and working
Yes.
to secure grant, or was this an RFP?
well, they're thinking both.
Yeah,
So for the private development that would help surround the parks, they would do that through an RFP. They're also out soliciting grant money to try to do one of them. And they're actively working on a grant request right now.
no, that's great. Because I know this concept has been in the comprehensive plan since
Yeah.
the first iteration in, what was that, '06?
Yeah, and it was designed for the Downtown Revitalization Initiative grants, which are big $10 million grants. And Beacon has just never been politically favored to get those grants. Every year they say, oh, you had a great application, but we decided to give it to somebody else. I think it's connected to the governor's office.
Personalities,
in terms of
relationships.
who makes the final decision. And
Yeah.
Beacon is always looked at as, you guys are doing great, why do we need to give money to you? That's been the attitude.
Interesting. Well, thanks, John. This is
I
enlightening.
have one comment about,
Yep.
about the bus, the Be-Free bus, that has always bothered me, and that's the way the windows are masked off. And that's for at least two reasons. One is people walking by can't look in and see that there are, in fact, people riding that bus.
Exactly.
It just looks like a prison bus or something. And if you're on the bus, you can't look, I mean, I'm sure you can look out, sort of.
Yeah, you can
But
see
it
through
doesn't-
it, but it's not the
You
same.
don't really get to see where you're going, and it's like, the whole point is to, well, part of the point is so that people can see Beacon.
Yes.
Was that green bus you were talking about? The one that
That-
looks
that-
wrapped?
Yes.
I would
Yeah.
say blue, but yeah. Yeah, rat.
I'm not a big fan of wrap buses.
No.
I'm not a fan at all of wrap buses.
Okay, so we agree.
And I just wanted to bring one thing up, which is that some of the funding for the bus comes from the MTA in Metro North, and I think they might have input onto the routing, and, you know, it has to service the train station, for one thing, since they're subsidizing it, and also there's a lot of federal funding that's involved, and there may be requirements that they have as far as the size and routing and other things that the county is beholden to that you might want to, that might limit the flexibility. Yeah.
I don't think MTA funds anything in the system at this point. I think they offered to fund it if development happened around the station at one point, but I don't think they fund the ferry, and they fund other things, but I don't think they fund the bus system. This Dutchess County gets federal money for their transit system, so they do get federal money, but I'm not sure they get MTA money. I'm not sure of that.
Okay, I just know that there are, you know, it's a complicated system.
Oh, yeah, yes, and
And-
yeah.
I've tried to look
First,
into it in
first you
detail.
reimagine the bus system, and then you try to make it happen, and you have to make certain adjustments, hopefully not too much. But the idea is first to say, what do we really want?
Yeah. All right, great. Well, I was going to save 10 minutes at the latter part of this part of the meeting to toss around ideas for upcoming future workshops, but we only have 2 minutes. So I would just request that if any of you all have thoughts or ideas on things that you might want to cover in workshop, that you share them through our city email, and then we'll compile them. And yeah, so we're just looking for ideas. Go ahead. You got nothing? Anyway, so we'll start our regular meeting. Welcome everyone